Most people don't sit down and analyze the economy. They feel it. They feel it in small moments that don't look dramatic enough to talk about out loud. Standing in a grocery store, staring at prices that feel unfamiliar, even though the products are the same. Opening a banking app and seeing a balance that looks thinner than it did last month, even though nothing went wrong. Checking rent, utilities, insurance, subscriptions, and realizing that almost everything in life now arrives as a recurring charge. It doesn't feel like collapse. It feels like pressure. Constant, quiet pressure. And that's why so many people share the same thought, even if they'd never phrase it the same way. Something feels off. You're working more, planning more, worrying more, and yet the sense of moving forward is weaker than it used to be. Stability feels temporary. Security feels rented. Ownership feels like a distant milestone that keeps drifting away. So people say the economy is broken. They say it's failing, they say it's unsustainable, they say it can't keep going like this. But that explanation is comforting, because if something is broken, it implies it wasn't meant to work this way. It suggests malfunction, error, unintended consequences. The harder truth is that the economy isn't broken at all. It's functioning smoothly, predictably, and very selectively. If the system were truly broken, the people at the top would be panicking, capital would be fleeing, institutions would be scrambling to redesign the rules. Instead, what you see after every shock is recovery, fast recovery, just not where you live. Markets stabilize, corporate profits rebound, asset prices recover, executive compensation resets upward. Meanwhile, wages lag, benefits shrink, costs stay elevated. That's not failure. That's filtration. The economy didn't stop working. It stopped working for everyone. For most of the 20th century, there was a basic assumption built into economic life. If you worked harder, if you were productive, if you contributed more value, you would gain stability over time. Not luxury, not wealth, but predictability, a home, savings, a future that felt manageable. That connection has been quietly severed. Productivity kept rising. Output increased. Technology made work faster and more efficient. But wages flattened. The gap didn't disappear. It moved. It pooled upward into profits, assets, and financial instruments that most people never touch. You're not imagining the disconnect. You're living inside it. The modern economy rewards ownership far more than participation, and most people don't own the things that generate returns. They own debt. They own obligations. They own risk. Take housing. You're told prices are high because of supply and demand. That story sounds neutral, almost scientific, but it ignores a crucial shift. Housing stopped being treated primarily as shelter. It became an asset class. Once that happens, affordability stops being the goal. Scarcity becomes valuable. Volatility becomes profitable. Homes are no longer built mainly for people who live in them. They're built for balance sheets. So when prices rise faster than wages, that isn't an accident. It's alignment. Alignment with incentives that favor capital over stability. You're not competing with other families anymore. You're competing with investment logic. And when you lose that competition, the system doesn't frame it as exclusion. It reframes it as flexibility. Renting is freedom. Subscriptions are convenience. Temporary access is modern. Ownership, meanwhile, becomes optional, even discouraged. Ownership creates independence. Independence reduces compliance. And compliance is extremely valuable. So the economy shifts you toward permanent dependency, but sells it as choice. Healthcare works the same way. Education works the same way. Transportation, communication, even work itself. Everything essential becomes something you pay for continuously, without ever fully owning. You don't finish paying. You maintain access. And when access is conditional, behavior becomes predictable. Inflation fits neatly into this structure. You're told it's natural, inevitable, a force of nature, like weather. But inflation doesn't affect everyone equally. It erodes wages faster than it erodes assets. It punishes cash. It rewards leverage. It quietly transfers purchasing power upward without requiring a vote or a policy announcement. For large institutions, inflation is a variable. For individuals, it's a shock. Prices move immediately. Paychecks don't. That delay is where stress lives, and that stress is individualized. You're told to budget better, to cut back, to optimize, to accept less and call it discipline. Inflation becomes a silent tax, one that doesn't show up as a line item, but drains value month after month. A tax you didn't vote for but still pay. This isn't chaos, it's calibration. The system needs consumption to continue. It needs debt to stay serviceable. It needs people working, spending, worrying, but not organizing. So pressure is applied carefully. Not enough to cause revolt, not enough to collapse demand, just enough to keep people dependent and tired. That's why emergencies are so devastating now. Not because people are reckless, but because the system removed buffers from ordinary life. There's no slack, no margin, no room for error. One medical bill, one missed paycheck, one rate increase, and everything shakes. Fragility isn't a side effect, it's efficient. A fragile population adapts quietly. A secure one asks questions. And this is only the beginning of the story. Look at how responsibility is framed now. Every pressure point is personalized. If you're struggling, the assumption is that you mismanaged something. You chose wrong. You didn't plan far enough ahead. You didn't invest early enough. You didn't optimize your career path, your education, your side hustles, your mindset. Systemic strain is translated into individual failure. That translation is powerful because it keeps anger pointed inward. You don't ask why the ground keeps shifting. You ask what's wrong with you for not keeping up. But think about how many rules changed while you were playing by the old ones. Careers that once led somewhere now stall. Degrees that were sold as tickets to stability turn into lifelong debt. Pensions disappear and are replaced with personal responsibility plans that shift all risk onto individuals who have the least margin for error. You're told to think long-term in a system designed around short-term extraction. Even time itself is restructured. Work bleeds into evenings, weekends, phones, notifications. You're reachable, trackable, measurable. Output is monitored, but security isn't guaranteed. Loyalty flows upward, precarity flows downward. And yet the narrative insists this is freedom, flexibility, opportunity. If the economy were broken, it would be unpredictable. But it's not. It behaves consistently, especially during crises. Every downturn reveals the same pattern. Losses are socialized at the bottom. Gains are privatized at the top. Relief flows upward first, trickling down slowly, if at all. And when things stabilize, the rules that cause the damage remain intact. That's not negligence. That's design. The system isn't trying to make everyone wealthy. It's trying to make participation mandatory. You don't need to thrive. You just need to keep showing up. Debt ensures that. Debt ties the future to the present. It turns tomorrow's labor into today's compliance. It narrows choices without ever formally removing them. You can quit, but you shouldn't. You can say no, but at a cost you can't afford. So debt becomes invisible infrastructure. Not a mistake, but a feature. And the more expensive life becomes, the more effective that infrastructure gets. Ownership fades, but obligations multiply. Subscriptions replace assets. Fees replace margins. Everything is smaller, thinner, more fragile, except the expectations placed on you. Work harder, adapt faster, absorb shocks quietly, and notice how rarely the system asks anything of those who benefit most from it. When prices rise, consumers adjust. When profits fall, workers are cut. When markets wobble, governments intervene. When households wobble, they're told to be resilient. Resilience has become a euphemism for endurance without power. You're encouraged to stay hopeful but not demanding, optimistic but not organized, grateful for access, not insistent on ownership. Because once people realize the economy isn't failing them by accident, the conversation changes. It stops being about motivation and starts being about structure. And structure is harder to ignore. That's why the system spends so much effort convincing you that this moment is temporary, that relief is coming, that cycles will turn, that patience will be rewarded. But cycles don't help if you're locked out of the parts that recover first. Asset inflation restores wealth quickly for those who own assets. Wage growth lags for those who sell time. That gap compounds. Every year, it becomes harder to catch up, no matter how disciplined you are. This isn't about laziness. It's about leverage. Those with leverage ride volatility. Those without absorb it. And most people live entirely on the absorbing side. So when someone says the economy is broken, what they're really saying is that the promise they were given no longer matches the reality they're living. They did what they were told. And the outcome doesn't make sense. But the outcome makes perfect sense if you understand the goal wasn't broad stability. It was sustained extraction without visible collapse. That requires balance, enough pressure to keep people dependent, enough relief to keep them hopeful, enough noise to keep them distracted. The system doesn't need you to believe it's fair. It just needs you to believe it's inevitable. Because inevitability shuts down resistance faster than force ever could. And that's the most important shift of all. Inevitability is the most effective form of control. When people believe there is no alternative, they stop looking for one. They stop comparing. They stop imagining things being different. They adapt instead. And adaptation in this system looks like acceptance. You accept that you'll work longer than your parents did. You accept that you'll own less, even while producing more. You accept that stability is conditional, temporary, and easily revoked. Not because you agree, but because resistance feels expensive. This is how the economy maintains itself without appearing violent. There are no chains, no guards, no force, just incentives that quietly punish deviation and reward compliance. If you push too hard, you risk losing access. If you slow down, you fall behind. If you question too openly, you're told you're unrealistic. So most people internalize the rules and police themselves. They don't ask why ownership keeps drifting upward. They ask how to budget better. They don't ask why work guarantees less every year. They ask how to optimize productivity. The system doesn't need to silence you. It just needs to redirect your attention. That's why so much financial advice focuses on behavior, not structure, on habits, not incentives, on mindset, not power. Because once you start asking structural questions, the answers get uncomfortable. Why does every essential cost rise faster than wages? Why is saving punished while borrowing is rewarded? Why does security depend on continuous performance? Why does risk flow downward while protection flows upward? These aren't philosophical questions. They're practical ones. They shape daily life. And they reveal something important. The economy is extremely good at producing outcomes, just not the ones it promised you. It promised upward mobility. It delivered volatility. It promised opportunity. It delivered competition with capital. It promised freedom. It delivered conditional access. None of that requires the system to collapse. In fact, collapse would disrupt extraction. What the system needs is continuity. Just enough stability to keep everything running, and just enough instability to keep people dependent. That's why crises never resolve the underlying issues. They accelerate them. After every shock, ownership concentrates. After every recovery, inequality widens. After every reset, the baseline shifts downward for workers. And yet the language never changes. Hard work, responsibility, patience, resilience. These words sound neutral, even noble, but they're doing a lot of work. They turn endurance into a moral obligation. They turn survival into a personal virtue. And they keep the focus exactly where the system wants it, on you. But once you see the pattern, it becomes difficult to unsee. You start noticing how often you're asked to absorb shocks that never reach the top. How often efficiency gains bypass your paycheck. How often progress feels temporary, reversible, fragile. You realize that stress isn't a personal failure, it's a signal. a signal that the rules don't align with your interests. That doesn't mean there's an easy escape. Awareness doesn't magically create leverage, but it does change how you interpret your experience. You stop framing struggle as incompetence. You stop assuming everyone else figured something out that you missed. You stop confusing pressure with purpose. And that shift matters because systems like this depend on isolation, on people believing their experience is unique, that they're alone in their frustration, that everyone else is managing better. They're not. Millions of people are responding rationally to irrational pressure. They're tired not because they're weak, but because the system demands constant adaptation without offering stability in return. The economy isn't broken. It's optimized. Optimized to grow without distributing ownership. Optimized to extract without collapsing demand. Optimized to function without being fair. And once you understand that, the story you were told about yourself starts to fall apart. You're not behind, you're not lazy, you're not bad with money. You're operating inside a structure that was never built around your long-term security. That realization doesn't come with applause. It doesn't feel inspiring, it feels unsettling. But it's also clarifying, because when you stop expecting a system designed for extraction to deliver stability, you stop blaming yourself for its outcomes. You start measuring success differently. You start questioning defaults. You start paying attention to where value flows and where it doesn't. And that's where the real conversation begins. Not about hacks, not about shortcuts, but about design. Who benefits? Who carries risk? Who absorbs failure? Those questions don't have simple answers, but they're the right ones. And if this feels uncomfortably familiar, if it feels like it's describing your life more accurately than any productivity advice ever has, you're not imagining it. You're recognizing the system for what it is. If you want, you can leave a comment with what part of this hit closest to home. Not because there's a perfect solution waiting, but because understanding stops being isolating once it's shared. The economy isn't broken. It's just not built for you.